Hey, it's Chris. I'm back, and we're going to go nuclear on this. We're going to get rid of the many-to-many relationship. Just don't think it's working. It's not me, it's you, many-to-many relationships. Okay, so nuclear means that, well, let's look at what we're doing again. So, what we've got is we've got the grocery list, we've got items coming down. So click items. We want this to add to a user's list. And the way we looked at doing that before was this is an explicit join table in Prisma. This specifies a relationship, and we've got some extra metadata on the relationship that we want to expose with access to. Problem is, it's difficult to write to this. Prisma doesn't really provide the same functionality on many relationships as it does on one-to-many or one-to-one relationships. So we're going to just make this easy. We're going to create a one-to-many relationship for this, and we're going to basically get rid of what we've already written and sort of start over. And then when we create this, we'll copy the item to the user items table, but it's not going to be linked directly to it. So it will be denormalizing some of the data in the item table to that, and it'll be loosely coupled with that other table. So let's start looking at how we want this to be shaped. So we'll leave this up for reference right now. I'm going to create a new model, user item, and it will have an ID that can be a string, default, and we'll allow that to be an integer, or to auto increment. Why is it complaining about that? Oh. Hope if you select the right one. So that could be an integer. And let's see, what else do we need as part of that? So this needs to be tied to users. So it will be tied to the user model, and we have to create the relation, and it will be on the fields user ID, which we need to create, and it's going to reference the ID field of the user model. So let's create that user ID, and the user ID is a string. So that's created the relationship from user item to user. Now we need to fix the user item relationship, and that's going to be, sorry, I'm looking at some notes. That's going to be a user item, an array of user items. So got the user ID. Let's see, what else do we need? We're gonna have some of our denormalized data. So we're gonna have an item name. That's gonna be a string. And we're gonna have an item ID, and that's gonna be an int. go ahead and save that so it shapes it. Let's see, we need a created at. That'll be a date time, default now. Copy that, paste it, updated it. And then the other unique piece will be the picked. This is whether it's been picked at the store. And default on that will be false. Okay, so we've established the relationship, a one-to-many relationship between the user and the user item. So that's the relationship there. We can get rid of this items on user, and we'll just nuke this whole section right there. All right, let's see if we did this correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to stop our server. Okay. So we made one change to that. So our server, let's see, we need to save. So yarn redwood db save. See if there's any complaints. Yes, so there's a complaint. So we have the same issue again where our migrations are off of our schema. So this is the Nulear part of the Nulear option. Let's delete the database again. And I'm really tired of having to add those items again. So we might look at creating a seed at some point. So let's save that again and see what happens. Oops, is neither built in or refers to another model. Oh, we still have this attached on users. So good catch, Prisma. We won't send a report. That was my fault. All right. So it added this, is highlighting the changes that we made. So let's see if it'll let us put it up. All right. So that's up. Let's run the database, or let's run the application again, and we'll see if anything's still in there. Is it up? Looks like it's up. Refresh the page. All right, no complaints here. Nothing in the database. So let's take a quick minute and let's run a DB seed so we can stop having to add those one at a time. So open up the seeds folder, and it looks like they have an example here. They want you to make this item potent. So that means that it's going to look first before it adds it. So let's make some items, and we'll just do an array of strings. So what did we add? Milk, IPAs. I don't really care if you're not an IPA fan. I am. Beer. What else can we add? Pasta. Pizza. Let's change that to pizza. All right. So let's map over that. Item. So we need to check whether these items are already in the database. So const exists equals await db. Means this needs to be an async function. Let's see, item find many where name is equal to, well, name is equal to if we map over that with a name, then we can just take advantage of the S6 syntax where name is name. Okay, so if this exists, we need to check whether exists has a length, because it's going to return an array. So if we've got 2 beers in there, then it will return an array. And if there is no length on that, then we can create the item. And let's pull up the structure so we can see what's required for items. Looks like the only things that we'll need to actually fill in, well, really the only thing we need to fill in is name. Looks like everything else we'll fill in. So name is name. Okay. So let's set that to a variable and return it. Or console log it. That way we know what we've created, and it's console log created items. All right. So let's see, does this run on the server? Okay, there's no consoles. So let's quit the server and yarn redwood db seed. Okay, so it doesn't like something that we've done. Okay, so the problem that I did here was actually you don't just go straight over the object. You have to put the data in first. Okay, that is poorly structured. Can't leave it like that. People are watching. Alright, so it decided to move it to another line. Alright, let's try that again. Quit the server. Let's try seeding it again. All right, so looks like it did see the database with 4 items, and it's like it hit the console log before it got through the items because it's an async function. Didn't make the JavaScript wait on that. So let's run it and see if we have any objects that we can search. Hope you guys are all doing well today, and gals, folks. Sorry, the light's a bit off. So let's refresh this. And IPA's pizza. Pizza's the new object. Okay. So what we've done so far is we've changed the structure of the schema to now use a one-to-many relationship on user items. We're still only working with this, with the canonical items. That's what shows up in here. These are the canonical items. So we don't have to change any of that. What we need to do, though, is we need to create the SDL and the... I'm going to open up another one of these. So create the SDL, use NVM use 12. So create the SDL and create the services. So let's do yarn redwood generate. Is it generate? What is it? Oh, I always forget the syntax on this. It's just G. So let's do the service first, service item. Yarn redwood generate SDL and the user item. All right. Take a look at what it generated. So it generated the ability to find all user items that are in the database. We'll need to fix that. You don't really want to expose that. And the SDL. So we've got these abilities, so these should show up in the playground. So I can search for user items now. Let's look at the docs and you can see what's available on there. So we've got the ID, the user, so we can navigate up to the user. User ID, their item name, item ID, whether it's been picked, and then when it was created. So just an example, I think we can go from users, we'll show the email, and that's listed as items. And So it looks like this is still connected with a different schema. So let's go to users. It's not that one. The users SDL. Okay, so this is currently going over the item. We want this to go over user item. And there's a huge difference between this and user item. So let's open up the SDL of user item. This includes the picked and the item ID and item name. So this should reflect it now. Let's refresh that page. Item ID, item name, picked. So there are no items in there now. But you can see that GraphQL's got the correct relationship between the two. So I guess let's commit these changes. Committing on master, don't judge me. Switch to 1 to n on user item. Again, the repository is CSEllis /grocery. Go ahead and upload those up so you can look at them if you need to. Nobody's watching. Okay. Query type users. All right. So let's change gears and let's go from the cell, the item search cell. And essentially what we want, I'll go back over to this. Essentially what we want is we want to be able to select one of these, whether it's clicking or navigating up and down with the arrows or tabs. Probably just arrows. And select one of these. And when we select it, we want that to use a mutation to add that item to the user items table. So let's start off with a click or with a handler, the selection handler. So let's see. So we'll start at the lowest level and move up. On click is equal to, and we'll need to pass the, we'll call it an item select. And we'll pass the event and the item, the whole item down to the item select. So const item select. First thing we need to do is prevent default. Default for the anchor tab is to navigate to it, and we'll log the item. So that should immediately, you see it doesn't navigate away. And I can select multiple items. And we're getting the ID and the name. So we need to hook that up to a mutation. And mutations in Redwood, they're sort of ferried into you from the RedwoodJS web package. So imports, and let's set Redwood web, and we're going to do use mutation. Next we need to define the mutation, say uppercase, use GQL, mutation J, save user item. It's going to take an input, create user item input. User item input. I always felt like this GraphQL syntax is odd, but whatever. Okay. So here's the mutation defined. So we need to do a const create use mutation, save user item. And that makes this mutation available in create. We're going to use it down here. So the way I envision this, the only data we really need to pass the server is the ID of the item that the user clicked. We're not going to trust the user's client that it's them on the client. We're gonna use the server to manage that. So we need to get the ID, which we can destructure. Let's see, ID. And do we even really need a structure? We'll just type item.id. So we're going to use this function create, and then it's going to take variables with an input ID colon item ID. So we could have destructured it, but I don't think we really needed to. Don't need that anymore. All right, so we've got this sending to this create user item function, which we haven't defined yet. So we're going to go define that. Create user item. So let's go to the user items SDL. Is that where we want to define it? Check my notes on how I... Okay, so we need to create a mutation type and it will return an ID. Okay, so now we need to look at this create user item input. Oh, it's right there. Okay. So the only thing we really need, we're never going to allow people to add these things by themselves. The only thing we really need in there is an ID, which is an integer. So that should allow this to go to services now, which we need to create a create user item service. So let's check and see if we can look at this data coming in. That's all we're going to check. If we're receiving this data. Props. So, fingers crossed. Let's see if we can get this over. Okay, we've got a syntax error. GraphQL does not take closing tags. That's force I have it. It's very close to JavaScript. I've sort of almost even stopped doing it in JavaScript, so I don't know why. Okay, so there's no complaints. And right here, we've received the ID. I'm going to squish that over to the side. Click pizza, click IPAs. So we're receiving this on the server now. So count that as a success. So just to review what we've done, we've created a select handler. I'm going to call it select because if the person's using a desktop, they may end up using their keyboard to select an item. For example, if you search something on Google, you can up and down arrow to select something. So hopefully I'll be able to build something like that. So select handler, it gets the ID of the item that's selected, and it then ships it over to, ferries it over through GraphQL to the server. Goes through mutation, hits the SDL, and then that sends it over to services. And here is where we're going to interact with our database. So let's do a big old commit, create mutation for create user item. So, got this on the server. We need to get the ID of the user, or we need to get the current user, and this one's going to be pretty simple. So let's go over to auth. We've sort of are doing it with require auth. We can actually sort of just use that information. It does make sense for it to be called get current user. We're doing some other stuff in this that I don't want to change right now. So there's like side effects in that I don't think we really want to mess with. I'm gonna say get user, and then it's on the server. Make this an async function. This doesn't block anything. And we'll just return the context of the current user. That's what this require auth is checking, whether they're in the context. We're just gonna get that context. So this is now available for us to import. Sorry, I'm checking my notes. So we're going to import get user server from source lib auth. And const current user get user server. We'll wait that, which means this needs to be an asynchronous function. Okay, so the way it's set up now, we should be able to click on this and then see a console log. So now we've got the current whole user object. So we've got the user. Let's get the item. db.item.find one where ID is equal to props.input ID. Let's check the item. Okay, so that looks like a promise. Oops. So let's await that. And now we get some pizza. Okay, so we have the pieces of data that we need. Now we just need to create the user item. So that's pretty simple. We're just gonna create user item equals await db user item dot create, and that's going to take a data object and item name. This is part of the denormalization. It's item.name, item ID, item.id, and we're going to say picked is false. And this is where we connect the user. So you connect it on the ID. Current user.id. And that's user item. So let's see what happens when I click milk. All right, so we've got a ID, one milk, item ID picked false. So that means that's the user item. So let's return just the ID. Return user item .id. And that's what should show back up in the client when we're doing this. Click milk. Well, that's not coming back. I don't see any errors. Let's check GraphQL and see what we've got. Well, look at that. We've got items on our user. So we've done it. Now what we need to do is we need to display it, but that shouldn't be too difficult. Let's see. This is just the search, so this is creating the mutation. We haven't done anything to destroy it or anything else like that. Let's save this. Create user item in table. So let's go. Let's close all these out. And let's switch back over to web. So what's that page again? That page is, that's the plan page, which is the home page. So what we want is we want to have a component underneath this of all of the items in the user items table. Do we have a user items cell? We don't. So let's create a user items cell. Yarn redwood generate cell user items. And let's import that. Go over to the user items cell. And this is returning all user items and their IDs. Let's also return their item names. So we are showing the item names of the ones clicked on. Beer, that's the only one. So I clicked beer. That didn't reload it, but if I refresh the page, it did show up. So I have to sort that out in a minute. But we did show that we were able to add items to the user items. So let's look over at the Tailwind UI, see if there's anything that looks good for displaying a list of items. So that's their marketing. Stacked lists. It's promising, but it's a bit too wide. Maybe this list containers, which is what we probably want. So we'll have to wait for that to come out for really good styling on it. But Let's use that. So there's the first table row. Let's delete the rest of them. So they have an alternating class on it. We won't worry about that right now. So when you're on a grocery list, what is it you need? You need the name. Do we even need a head? Need a head? Yeah, let's say grocery list for now. I don't think that there's going to be any other properties. It's just going to be a single table. And obviously this could change. This is just how we're iterating right now. So let's do a user items map, user item, return, and that'll be user item name, and we need a key, user item.id, save that, get our automatic formatting, and then if you remember, there's the class requirement for React, where we need to Adam and Steve have this in just HTML. Alright, fingers crossed. Let's see if this works. There we go. So we have a grocery list showing, and we have milk again. So ideally we don't want it to add an item that's already in there, but milk should show up at the bottom. And it does. Okay. So we've what we've done is we've made a mutation that will accept this item select and add it to a user's grocery list. So right now this is all of the items in any grocery list for any user. We're going to tie that down. We need to make it so you can only add an item one time. We need to make it so you can get rid of items. So there's more to do, but we've made a lot of progress today. I think the rest is going to be more straightforward. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.